Early bird crew, the prompt on time crew. Love it.
All right. All right. We got some people trickling in, some familiar faces. So if you're playing webinar bingo, we're just trying to fill up those spots for you.
Awkward silence. You can put that on the bingo card.
Go ahead. Yeah, that's the free space.
That's a free space. Any webinar you've ever been to, people are always trickling in. And you see a few familiar faces.
The faces are always familiar, even though you can't.
They always are.
Yeah, right. What else we got? We got we'll wait for a few more minutes. And then we'll get started. Yeah. But I actually do mean that. I do mean that we will wait another minute and then get started.
Oh, how about we're supposed to small talk about the weather?
Yeah. Well, it's raining here. What's it doing in Denver?
Well, I wouldn't know. I don't live there. I live in Colorado Springs.
Colorado Springs. Yeah, all right, Colorado is just one big Denver in my mind.
Some say that Colorado is Texas' largest state park.
Some do say that.
Okay, it's 42.
I think we've small talked enough. I think we've made it. I think we got a good crowd. I think we're ready.
Okay. All right, let's go. All right, welcome to the webinar, everyone. My name is Cody Binder. I'm joined by Andrew Triplett. You are at the To The Point Database Cleanliness webinar, and we will go ahead and kick things off. All right, so like I said, this is Andrew Triplett. He needs no introduction. The man, the myth, the legend. You probably know who he is already. You've probably had a Zoom call with him at one point or a Teams call. Andrew is a father of two. He is a husband of one wife. He calls Memphis home, specifically Bellevue Baptist Church is his home church there in Memphis. Any words you want to say, Andrew?
Only that I did not create this slide and I did not approve the man, myth, and legend, but that it is true. I do work at Touchpoint, so that part is accurate.
And I am Cody Binder. Like I said, I'm somewhat new to the Touchpoint team. I joined the team at the beginning of October, and I've been in the church management software industry space for 6 years and change, father of 3, so that's one more than you, Andrew, if we're keeping score. I am also the husband of one wife. I call Woodman Valley Chapel home here in Colorado Springs, and man, I'm excited to just be a part of the team. I am, as you can see, my title is assistant to the head of consultant. That's not real. I'm just a consultant, and I'm learning under Andrew's tutelage. So yeah, that's us. All right, let's keep going. We have an agenda today, which is in this case a good thing.
Yes.
We are going to talk about kind of the why. What would happen if? We're going to start with why at the very beginning there. And then we're going to talk about people records. Andrew's going to walk us through a database database audit how-to. We're going to talk a little bit about processes. We're going to talk about power to the people to delete or not to delete. And then the new people manager. You guys can't wait to meet him. He's great. And then involvement hygiene sort of best practices. And then next steps, kind of the okay, now what from there. So let's play a quick game of what would happen if. So what would happen if you and your team and your church let your data go? What would happen? It would probably sort of feel something like this dark closet right here, right? So in real life, your data at that point couldn't be trusted. You wouldn't be able to make informed decisions about ministry things. So things like, should we continue this ministry or sunset it? Should we start a new ministry? Should we expand northeast or southwest? Should we make changes to an existing ministry? Do we need to recruit more leaders for this or that? All of that, you'd be sort of dependent on people's sort of gut feelings. Well, I think the college ministry should fill in the blank, right? Just sort of based on hunches. You'd also be dependent on your memory, your neurons, your brain cells to remember to text this family that you haven't seen in a while, or to follow up with the Mahomes family that just came to church for the first time this past weekend, or whatever the case might be. You're dependent on your memory to take those actions. And then I think, in my opinion, most importantly, people could wander in and out of your church without anybody ever really knowing. There's kind of an old, I guess you could call it, I mean, Jesus said it, so it's a parable, but it's talked about in church management circles of a good shepherd doesn't say, I have around about 100-ish sheep. He knows he has 100 sheep. He names them. He knows those sheep. That's why he realizes that one has gone astray, and that prompts him to take action to go after that one sheep. And that's kind of our passion at Touchpoint about helping equip you guys, church leaders, to do exactly that, and to bring people into connection and community and fellowship and discipleship, using the technology that God's given us to do those things. All right, I'm talking too much. What would happen if you had the most organized database on the planet? What would happen if you had the most organized database on the planet? So, to the flip side of that coin, right? So your team would know that your database is a direct reflection of what's happening in real life within your community. Your team could make informed decisions with confidence based on facts rather than hunches. And every day, people would get the right communication from the right people at the right time. You could prompt the right leader who knows this person to shoot that text out and just ask how they're doing because we haven't seen them in a while. Or we could really create an incredible experience that exceeds people's expectations as they're wanting to become a part of our church family. And with the Lord's help, every person would feel welcomed and valued and loved. And that's really the heartbeat behind this entire presentation of database cleanliness, which was a really dry topic, but a really important topic. So with that, Andrew, go.
Yeah, right. So how are we going to do that? So, when we talk about having an organized database, so that we can help the real life people in our church feel valued, feel loved, feel known. So how are we going to get there? So first, let's talk about a people record. Okay. So what is a complete record? What does a complete record look like? Well, on a grand scale, a record technically is not complete until, in my opinion, these things are filled out. We have a first and last name, we have an address, email address, phone number, date of birth, gender, and marital status. Those are kind of the key elements of a good, clean, up-to-date record. Okay. Now, having said that, that's going to vary. That's going to vary by church. Some churches, they don't really need all that information, and some churches, maybe they need more information. Maybe they have some extra values built into the database with information that they would like to have that go beyond just those standard values there. And then it's also going to vary by record as well. So here's what I mean by that, or by person in our database, that is. Here's what I mean. If we have a first-time guest that has never been to our church before, we might only have an opportunity to get their first and last name and maybe one form of communication. But a member of our church, well, that's much different. That's a person who going back to Cody and the story that he used from the biblical text of Jesus going after the lost sheep. Well, that's our member. That's our flock. Those are the people who are a part of our church. And so those records should look much different than the first time visitor. For those, we should know this information. We should know whether or not they're married. We should know their gender. We should know, hopefully, their date of birth if they're willing to share that with us. With kiddos, much easier. We'll get into that a little bit later on. But this is information that if this is our flock, this is who we're called to minister to, we should have that information. So, what to do if that information is not there? What if you have a whole bunch of records that information is not on those records? So a common question that Cody and I get is, hey, can we delete this? Can we delete this information? So yes, the delete role does exist. There is a delete role. You cannot give it to yourself, and you cannot hand it out to other members of your staff. It actually has to be granted by Touchpoint staff, Touchpoint personnel. And if we do give that out, if you request it, we will of course give it. But we only like to give that to maybe 1 or 2 people on your staff, simply because we do not encourage the deletion of data. The question that we get is, hey, I just don't need this information. They came 10 years ago. Well, my response to that is, well, maybe they'll come back. It's not impossible, and it's really not hurting anything. It's not hurting anything to have that record in the database. It's not affecting your price or anything of that nature. It's just a good piece of data for someone that may come back. And you never know, if you have an email address and you email them about an event coming up, maybe that's the moment that they say, hey, you know what, I need to get reconnected. I need to get back into church, and they come back. What we do encourage, besides deletion, is archiving. So we have this concept of archiving records. I would really encourage you just to go ahead and archive records. There's a great feature in Touchpoint, whether you know about it or not, that actually unarchives records automatically. So if you get a little archive happy and you archive too many people, that's okay, because the system is automatically going to catch that and unarchive those records based on criteria like, hey, they attended, they're giving, they register for something, or someone reached out to them in the last 30 days. All those things would prompt the record to actually be recreated in your database. But there are opportunities to delete data. Of course, it's a record that first name is Bob, last name is blank. We don't have their information. We don't have an email address. Of course, that's a good record. That's a good candidate to delete. So that brings us to what we call the database audit. So how do we do kind of a very cursory, very simple database audit? Look at the data, see what we have, and understand the cleanliness of our data. So whenever I do this for a church, the first place I start is on the people search page. So hopefully you all are familiar with the people search page. It's what we call the basic search sometimes. And it looks like this. It looks like the screenshot that you're seeing right now on your screen. What I like to do when I come to the screen is first take a tally of how many people are in the database. There's no hard and fast rule for how many people should be in your database. Some databases are very big, some are much smaller. Typically what I see is that the number of records in your database is about 4 to 6 times the amount of members that you have in your church. So if you have 1,000 members in your church, it's not uncommon to see 4,000 to 6,000 records in your database. That's kind of what I see, but again, no right or wrong. Next, what I like to do is I like to go to that member status. Like I said, members, that's our flock. Those are people that we should know the best. I like to filter for member, and then in the gender tab, or in the gender dropdown, I select unknown. And what a lot of times I see is, you might return 20, 30 people that are members of our church, but we're telling the database we don't know their gender. That's one that you can clean up right now as I'm talking if you wanted to. You won't hurt my feelings if you just pull up another tab and just do this exercise. You can get that cleaned up in a matter of minutes just using your best estimates based on the person's name. The next thing I do is I set marital status to unknown. And this one's a little bit trickier because, of course, you can't just look at someone's name and know whether or not they're married, but you can see if there's any kiddos on that list. If you have 5-year-old, 10-year-old on that list and their marital status is unknown, go ahead and take the time to set those to single because that's how Touchpoint will be treating them, obviously. So taking the time to kind of clean that up, that's some low-hanging fruit that you can get cleaned up real quickly. Taking a look at people who have no birthdays. I always like to take a look and see how many records in the database, especially members, we don't have birthdays for. Again, that might be a metric that your church cares deeply about. Other churches, not as much. Just added records. That's the next thing I do under member status is I take a look at just added records. How many just added records do we have in there? Now we'll talk a little bit later on about what is the new people manager? What's their responsibility in all this to get that updated? But your just added record should be trending towards 0. And for those of you that don't know, whenever a new record is added to your database, the member status of that record is just added. And so that number should be trending towards 0 at any given moment. If you're on this webinar today and you look at your just addeds and you have 3,000 just addeds and you say, oh boy, what are we going to do? I would recommend that you start fresh. Just start fresh. Today is a new day. It's a new beginning, and you can put good process in place to make sure that that's better. But what I would say is go ahead and tag those just added records, and then you can en masse, you can go and update those to not member. and now we're starting fresh. And from now on, every new record that we have, we're vetting it accordingly. Next, grade field. So taking a look, running some searches to see how many grades are on each record. Now, one of my favorite features within Touchpoint is that we are updating the grade field automatically every year. So if you indicate that a child is in first grade, then in Touchpoint on August 8th, that will be August 1st, I believe is the default. They will automatically go to second grade, and you can modify that default. It doesn't have to be August 1st. But on that date, they'll automatically advance. What that means is that if you have a child that we meet for the first time when they're in first grade, and then they move away for 3 years, and then they come back, the system's not going to say they're in first grade. The system will say they're in fourth grade, even though no one has touched that record in 3 years. So that's just another way that people can really feel known, feel valued when they come back to church. We already know what grade the child is, and we get them into the appropriate class. Taking the time to standardize your titles, so not everyone even knows this, but in your database you have titles, so Mr., Mrs., Miss, Doctor, etc. And you can actually standardize those, or they actually are already standardized. But taking the time to merge some of those titles, you can do that from the lookup codes screen, merge some of those titles so that you're using good, consistent processes among your entire staff for all of your titles. Okay. Take the time to convert people records to business records. That's going to make a big difference in your reports, make a big difference on your searches. If you are out there right now and you run a search and you have, McDonald's coming up every time you run a search because it meets some kind of criteria, take the time to convert that to a people record so it's not showing up on your searches automatically. And then finally, last thing on here, have a process in mind. Have a process. You will have a new people manager who's responsible for making sure that every time a new record is added to the database, that they're updating that to not member and they're vetting the record accordingly, making sure they have good, clean data in there. We don't have Bob and Susan Williams, first name Bob and Susan, last name Williams. That should be 2 different records. So someone taking the time to take and take ownership of that to split that out to 2 different records. Okay.
Yeah. And I think another sort of fact of life, especially in church, you're never going to get the most up-to-date information without giving people the ability to update their own information. If you're sort of relying on that to be more of a reactive process and sort of wanting to keep it in-house, people are going to change phone numbers, email addresses, they're going to move. They're going to have baby, all of these different things are going to get updated constantly. And the larger your church is, the more frequently those things are happening on a day in and day out basis, which make it that much more challenging to have up-to-date information in your database. So I think it's a good idea to really think through as a team and articulate why you need people's data. And we've already kind of talked about this, earlier in this webinar. But how specifically you guys as a team are going to use this information to love people well, to love them with excellence. And people look at their data, they think about their data very differently today than maybe we did 10 years ago, right? I mean, 10 years ago, we didn't even really think much about our data at all. And now it's kind of a hot button thing. But I think we might find that if we ask people for their up-to-date information, people, are probably likely a lot more receptive than we think about it because they trust the church to be a good steward of that information and to be able to use it for good purposes. But it is important to think through, why we need this data and what we're going to use it for and to be able to articulate that. So a great way of starting the process of gathering information. Maybe if your database is a little lean on people's information, you want to fill out those people records, is really just shooting out an email to your congregation and just showing them what you have on file. Does all of this look good, right? And if so, no action is needed. Have a great day. Let us know if we can do anything for you. If not, here's a button that you can click on to go and update that information for us so that XYZ, right? Another couple quick, pro tips, using those deep links, those special links, especially for things like registrations, can really sidestep a lot of brain damage that you might run into by creating unnecessary duplicates if we're not using those special links. So those special links are, registration links that instead of people having to go in and fill out all their information every time, being that we're emailing or texting it out to our people, the system is going to see, oh, we know who this email address belongs to. So you get to skip that step. The registrant gets to skip that step and just go directly into the registration process. So that's true not just of email, but also for text messages as well. So, and then not forgetting to reinforce these ideas. So regularly encouraging the people, your people, to use your mobile app to update their information. That their pocket computer that they've always got on them at all times is the best way for them to, the easiest way for them to keep that information up to date. So maybe just having a annual or biannual or whatever is the right rhythm, quarterly reminder or slide in front of, before service or whatever works for you guys, social media, whatever it is, to download the app and to update their information on the app. Make sure that you have the most up-to-date information. And then this seems like a no-brainer, but easy to kind of oversee. Linking to your app from your website. Download our app, which you guys probably don't need us to tell you to do, but having a link on your website, having a QR code throughout the building, social media, email, text messages, just making sure that you're sort of inviting people to the party of the app so that they can get the most up-to-date information about not only what's going on, but also just filling out that information for you and your team and making sure that it's up to date. So really putting the power in their hands.
So now let's talk a little bit about this new people manager and their job. So records are coming from everywhere. There's a lot of you have noticed and maybe even got a little frustrated that there's always just new records kind of piling up in the database. So that's where the new people manager comes in, and this is a really important responsibility. This is the person whose responsibility it is to go vet those records, make sure they're being created properly. Like I said a moment ago, if people are putting in data, they're combining their name with their spouse's name as they're filling out a registration, that kind of thing, that you're taking the time to clean those up and then connecting those to other related family, maybe putting them into their appropriate families and so on. So how are records being created? Well, typically records are created in one of three ways: registrations, giving, and attendance. And along with that, check-in, kind of one and the same thing there. So it's important to, within your lookup codes, to have entry points, and you can assign entry points on those registrations. It's a really good idea to kind of instill into your staff that you want to put entry points on registrations. There's an entry point for giving. If you don't know what I'm talking about, there's some good help documentation. If you just search for entry point, then you can get information on how to assign entry points. That way, when a new record does come in and you're saying, where did this come from? You can go take a look at that entry point there on the record and get a sense for how that's getting in. Now, a really important thing for everyone to know about a database, and this is any database, not just Touchpoint, but one of the worst things that we could do is that we would associate a registration to someone who didn't register, or worse, associate a gift to someone who did not give to our church. Imagine, if you will, that someone tries to give Bob Jones, tries to give to your church. He has a very generic name. You have a bunch of Bob Jones in your database, and we associate a $50 gift from this Bob Jones to a different Bob Jones. Well, that's going to really cause a lot of concern for that giver. He's going to lose trust in the church, and it's going to become a pretty big problem for that person. He may never give to your church ever again. So we really have to take precautions before just associating a gift to any person. We have to make sure that we're certain that the person that's giving is the person that we have in the database. So to that end, I ask the question often, where does the time come from? So I work with a lot of churches who are building registration, and they say, on this screen, we're asking for first and last name, email address, phone number, and date of birth. That's too much. We really want to streamline that. We want to make that faster. I completely understand that concern. And I agree. I think, making things easier for people is smart. But if we ask for less information, that's less for us to match on. Therefore, a higher chance of duplication, higher chance of a new record being created. So that's why I say the time comes from somewhere. The time either comes from the registrant filling out a little more information to hopefully help us match the record, or the time comes from your staff to match that duplicate. Now, I say that, and I hope you'd agree, we have a great duplicate finder in the system that does a really nice job of finding those duplicates, merging them together. I think our merge screen is really second to none in just kind of having the functionality that it does. You can add information as you're doing the merge. I think is really top notch. But think about that as you're building your registrations. The time is going to come from somewhere. So that brings us to, I think, the most controversial part of our presentation. It's really hard to be controversial when talking about database cleanliness, but that's something that Cody and I really pride ourselves in. So this is very controversial. Cody, you're new, so I'm going to make you show this slide. So why don't you?
Oh, thank you. Thank you
welcome.
very much. I appreciate that. Hot take alert, duplicates are not evil. Let me explain.
That's right. Hold on. We'll explain. We'll explain.
Okay, so duplicates, there is a sort of breaking point, right? Where there's so many duplicates that it's not an efficient use of it. Okay, well, we'll get that out of the way. Duplicates can create ministry opportunities. And I think it's not such a bad thing to just view them that way, to think about them that way. They give our team a good reason to reach out to people. They're conversations that can allow you to obviously get the most up-to-date information. And then, you can ask people just how they're doing, if you can get people on the phone, or if you can get them in a text conversation and see if there's anything you can do for it. It's just a good excuse to get in touch and make connections with the people that make up your church. And it's an opportunity in that sense. And then, of course, when you're done with this, over time, your database should be getting more and more and more clean, because you have those good systems and those good processes and those good practices, and you have your team bought into and trained up on how to not create duplicates. This is sort of something that can move the ball down the field for you in terms of getting cleaner and cleaner and cleaner over time. So yeah, once you have those merged, it kind of cleans the record. Hot takeover.
All right, so I'm going to kind of go through this portion a little bit quickly. We've really been focusing on people records throughout this presentation, but there's also the other side of the coin, which is involvements and keeping those involvements up to date. You do definitely want to audit your database on a consistent basis to make sure that the involvements that are in there need to be there. Again, I'm not such a proponent on deleting involvements that you don't need. I do recommend that you archive those, or on the involvement side, we actually call it deactivating. So you would deactivate an involvement. Taking the time on the involvement search page, there's a special report called the hierarchy report, the program division hierarchy report. I recommend that everyone run that on a consistent basis. That's going to show you the involvements that you have and the programs and divisions that they are in. So making sure that your involvements are in the appropriate programs and divisions is going to help from a reporting perspective. It'll because if they're in the wrong programs and divisions, that's going to skew your reports. That's going to skew especially attendance reports. So making sure that those are in the right place is really important. We have a report. The one that I'm actually showing on the screen is a custom report called the new involvement report. If anyone would like this, you can pop that into the chat. We'll be happy to put that on your database. But what this particular report does is it shows you an involvement, when it was created, who created it, which member of the staff created it, and then the program and division that it's in. So even in the screenshot there, you can see several of these are in a program and division called first program, first division. That's probably incorrect. So making sure that everyone is using good practices and sorting those accordingly. And then last thing I'll say here is we have this new concept of accounting codes for your registrations. So making sure that your registrations are tied to the appropriate accounting codes is important as well. Cody?
Yeah. And then kind of next steps, right? Okay, now what? So I think it's a great idea, and we've kind of mentioned this along the way, but getting buy-in from your team is absolutely essential. If I'm the only person in my house that's going through and cleaning things up, then my kids are just going to make a disaster of it. I need buy-in from them. to make sure that we are all doing our part to make sure that the house stays okay. Your teammates are not kids, and that's not what I mean to insinuate at all. But getting buy-in from them on why this is so important, not just for, your sanity, but really for discipleship, right? I mean, if like going all the way back to the beginning, going all the way back to the why, if our data is a mess, we are limited in the ability that we have as a team to care for people and love people and have that perfect communication go out to the perfect people at just the right time. So getting people to understand kind of how important this is and why it's important is huge. And then, creating and documenting those standards that you expect from your team on and training them on how to do these things. It's one thing to talk about how important it is. It's something else to really make sure that they know how to create a people record, how to manage registrations, how to create registry, all of those different things so that you're not making more and more of a mess over time, but you're getting cleaner and cleaner and cleaner over time. And then, of course, this is something that's not ever fun or easy to do, but if you have somebody, that you've really talked about the why and you've given them the knowledge and the ability to make that, and you keep running into, to have a conversation, to make sure that we're holding that brother or sister accountable because it is so important to make disciples in the church. And dad is a big part of that, especially in the modern church. So those can be great next steps along with, this webinar is obviously being recorded. You can share it with whoever you like. But I think that's a great place to start is having that conversation on the why, creating those standards, and then holding people accountable to those things. So with that, gang, that's kind of the end of the official presentation. We can hang out for questions and answers. Andrew and I and the whole Touchpoint team want to let you know that, man, we love you guys, our customers. We're praying for you as leaders in the church. And we want what you want for the gospel of Jesus Christ to go forward into the world and for disciples to be made and to take ground on the enemy. So yeah, we'll transition into more of Q&A time. And I know that Will and Haley and a few others have been kind of manning the Q&A, but let's take a look and see kind of what we got there.
Let me just say, a little bit of slip of the tongue there. I said if you'd like that new report to put it in the chat. Forgot chat is disabled. What I meant to say was put it in, if you'll just ask that as a question in the Q&A portion, we will get that to you. Many of you have already reached out, and we'll be sure to get that. We've already gotten your names down, so we'll get that over to you.
Okay, is there an example email and button that shows the person their info?
Yeah, so Cody referenced, so this question is in reference to something that Cody said towards the beginning about sending an email. So you have the ability to send an email to really any subset of your congregation, really your entire database if you even wanted to, where you could utilize replacement codes. So we do have several replacement codes. Again, take a look at the documentation, and in the documentation, if you'll just search for replacement codes, then you're going to find a whole long list of all the different replacement codes you can use in your email, and then send that to your, I would probably say kind of a smaller group, maybe just members or something like that, to say, hey, we have on file for you, we have your first and last name, which is this, we have your address, which is this, and so on and so forth. If this information is correct, no further action. If it's incorrect, please click here. And at that point, at that click here, you can either use a replacement code for create account. There's a replacement code for create account, or just link them to the database itself, so they can request a password, or link them over to your mobile app if you're up and live on mobile app.
Yeah, James is asking, are there built-in reports that can help you with finding duplicates or incomplete records?
I hope this isn't too on the nose, but the duplicate finder, of course, running the duplicate finder is the easiest way to find duplicates. Some questions I get with duplicates. A lot of people a really common question I get is, hey, why was this record created? I kind of have to take those on a case by case basis. What I like to do is go to the basic search and then type in that person's name and kind of look at the two records side by side. If you're seeing that, well, first of all, I'll tell you, if first and last name don't match, it's an automatic new record. Sometimes, people will look and they'll see that the first and last name don't match, but everything else does. Email address, date of birth, physical address, et cetera, that they all match. And so they kind of say, hey, why was this created? The answer to that is simply the first and last name didn't match. And that's always going to be a new record.
Great. And then let's see. Laura asked, great name. It's my wife's name. Do you not recommend reusing involvements?
Do you not recommend reusing involvements? I do. I do recommend reusing involvements. I do think it's good practice. And when I say that, I'm talking about involvements that you utilize on an annual basis. So I think summer camp is a great example of that. You have Camp 2019, Camp 2020, 2021, 2022, et cetera. And that kind of clutters up the database relatively quickly, even though you're maybe deactivating those. I say just go ahead and reuse those each year, so that you only have one in the database. The question I always get is, hey, aren't I losing, am I going to lose data? The answer is no, you're not going to lose any data by doing that, by dropping those members. When you drop members, I know that's kind of scary because it kind of feels like, man, I'm changing something fundamental to this record. You're really not. You're only modifying their relationship to that involvement, not to the church. So when you drop a member, they go to the previous tab, and then they can re-register the next year when you reopen that. And the beauty of doing that is that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to copy that involvement. You just reactivate that involvement, update the terminology that needs to be updated on the registration, and off you go.
Yeah. All right, a couple more. So Andrea asked, you talked about sending a current info email. What is the best way to include that info in an email? How would you do it, Andrew?
Utilizing those replacement codes, like I said. So we have replacement codes for first and last name, email address. I believe date of birth is in there as well. So that's the easiest way to fire that out. So you're not having to send that out individually, of course. You're sending that out to a group.
Cool. All right, let's do two more. Are you game?
Yeah, I think there was one from Karina that just caught my eye. I wanted to address this. When you are doing an audit to clean up gender, marital status, et cetera, can you mass update those records, or do you have to do it individually? So yes, you can absolutely do that in mass. So if you, I think that's a great use of a tag. So if you run a search for all your just addeds or something like that, and you want to go through those, you just tag those individuals, and then you should be able to update each of those fields that you just mentioned in mass. Now that doesn't work for something like date of birth, obviously, unless you have 10 people all with the same date of birth. I don't think we have that. But for things like marital status, yeah, that's a no-brainer. You can absolutely do it that way.
Okay, and then we'll do one more. And for those of you who we didn't get to, we still love you. Please submit those either in email or a support ticket or whatever the case is. We want to get those questions answered for you and equip you for the work of ministry. Let's do Michelle. And what happens if there is a registration fee associated with the involvement? Will it overwrite the history?
If there's a registration fee associated with the involvement, will it overwrite the history? So no, well, it replaces their answers from last year. And so that's why I say this is best for an involvement that's used annually. Maybe quarterly, that's kind of borderline, but I have churches that will use it for like a first semester, last semester, that kind of concept. But in terms of reusing an involvement, will it rewrite the information? You'll still have record that this person was enrolled in the involvement last year and the year before that and the year before that. So that information still exists. It's still there, and you can run searches on it very easily. Their transaction from last year is not overwritten in any way. That still exists, but their answers might be. So if last year they had an opportunity to register and say, hey, I want, for my free time, I want to go to the lake and I want to jet ski and I want to go horseback riding, but next year they want to select different options entirely. Yes, those will get overwritten from last year. So you'll get fresh answers for this year.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you guys for being a part of this and choosing to spend your most valuable asset, your time with us. And hopefully it was helpful and edifying. Andrew, thank you, man. You're a legend, and we all appreciate you and are so glad you're a part of our team. And I'm glad to be a part of this team now. And yeah, thanks for being here, guys. God bless everybody.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.